Hello, comic book readers the world over, and welcome to the very first Inked Editorial. What is an Inked Editorial, you might ask? Well, reviewing comics is great, but it's not always handy in letting me talk about some things I really want to talk about. I am sort of crunched for time in those. That, and there are some comics I just don't want to review, but would love to get the chance to talk about. So today we're going to look at just such an occasion. See, I don't get a lot of requests, but of the requests I do get, I generally get the same 4 requests over and over. Request number 1, review a Rob Liefeld comic. My response to that will have to wait until a future episode. Request number 2, review one of the Marvel or DC animated universe movies. To that I say, Cartoon Week exists for a reason, don't worry, I'll get to it. Request number 3, review a new comic for a change. Okay, look, it's some sort of misconception that I don't read new comics. I do, I just don't read them as much as I read older ones, because I like older ones more. And if you're really going to ask me to review newer comics when I have less to say about them, I guess, but really, it'll just have to wait. I have a lot of old comics to get through. Request number 4 is the one I get the most, and frankly, I see why. See, I am a Marvel guy until the day I die. DC is great, but Marvel just takes the cake. As such, I don't really get a lot of requests to review Spider-Man comics because, frankly, I think people are just getting tired of hearing me whine and complain about how much they rape Spider-Man. And I don't get any requests to review Avengers comics because everyone knows I love the Avengers. Why would they bother? But I never talk about the X-Men, and that's the request, to review X-Men. No specific comic, just review an X-Men comic. To that I say I would, but I'm not an X-Men buff. The same way I'm not a Batman buff or a Teen Titans buff. I never really took the time to read into those comics, basically due to lack of interest. But you're asking for it, so here it is. This is my review of the X-Men. Yeah, the whole thing. See, I don't dislike the X-Men and I don't like them either. I'm just kind of in that lukewarm middle ground area. And really, there are reasons for that. See, there are aspects of the X-Men that I do love, there are aspects of the X-Men that I do hate, and there are aspects of the X-Men that just make me ask questions that I really shouldn't have to ask. So let's compare my least favorite aspects of the X-Men to my favorite ones. First and foremost, the one thing that always turned me off to the X-Men comics is basically just the focus. See, while I do agree that the focus on prejudice is an actual very intriguing aspect to actually throw into a comic, I really think they went about it the wrong way. Why? Well, from a storytelling perspective, the Marvel Universe is a place with superhumans, gods, super science, aliens, and all other manner of freaky things under the sun. Why is everyone so biased against mutants? Well, I know the question's been asked a dozen times over, and the answer I get from people always seems to come back to, well, they were a freak accident. Mutants were born that way. That would hold water if not for the fact that there are a great deal of otherworldly heroes in the Marvel Universe that people dominantly celebrate or just ignore, the prime example of which being Thor, who was in fact born with his powers, sort of. Then people turn to, but everyone hates Spider-Man. Well, congratulations! You found one superhuman people regularly dump on in and out, mind you, of the Marvel Universe. But I'll remind you that people love the Fantastic Four and the bulk of the Avengers. The way I always thought they should handle it was by having people be prejudiced against the mutants that actually look bizarre. The perfect examples are Nightcrawler and Beast. Heck, during one point when Iceman got stuck in his ice form, an establishment I half wish would have been permanent, he should have received more flack for his appearance than his actual powers. There are tons of mutants with abnormal appearances. Making the prejudice more aimed at them is the wiser option. Then those mutants that don't suffer that problem would be sort of the middle ground and the peacekeepers trying to help change the world between the average people and the radically altered mutants. As for villains like Magneto, frankly, I did always half want to see what it'd be like if he were just made of metal or something. But Colossus beat him to that end, so there that is. Character portrayal is one of the worst things about the X-Men to me. In that, I mean to say that it's almost never really consistent in anything I've ever read. A character might act one way in one comic or cartoon, then be totally different in another comic or cartoon. That brings me to another point. Characters themselves. Aside from the obvious factor of there being way too many X-Men, a lot of the characters just seem shallow or two-dimensional, even repeats of previous characters like what little distinctions there are between so many of the Teen Girl X-Men and the early Shadowcat and/or Jubilee. In fact, I really only have 6 characters that frequently make my list of X-Men I like. 5.5 if you count how much this one annoys me because they can't seem to not milk the crap out of the Phoenix Force. Closer to 5.75 if you consider that the only version of Rogue I like is from the 90s animated series. I always envision Rogue as being a tough girl who has a tragic past and can take a lot of crap, but just rolls with the punches and comes out smiling. She always felt like the hope and joy of the team back then. But every comic I've read since watching that cartoon depicts her as this depressed, overly emotional brooder that nearly makes Batman look like a ray of sunshine. As for Jean Grey, I like her character when she isn't being milked for the Phoenix Force junk. She's just very sweet and considerate, but she can also be stern and very leaderly and can handle herself. But why she puts up with Cyclops is beyond me because that guy is a douche. Competition in comics is one thing. Ideas and concepts are being repeated all the time. I couldn't care less about that. No, my thoughts here are the fact that with the X-Men, they rip off themselves and it's not a scarce practice either. They pretty much always have the same 5 arcs. Hellfire Club, Apocalypse, MRD and Magneto, Phoenix Force, and/or Mr. Sinister. Those are pretty much all of the arcs, and all they ever do to mix things up, every once in a while anyway, that I've read, is combine a couple every once in a while. That's hardly worth mentioning, really. What other arcs there are never substantial and rarely matter half as much as any of the 5 things I just mentioned. I'm kind of getting tired of it. At least with Spider-Man and Batman, they have catalogs worth of villains to choose from. The X-Men are always up against the same crap. There's some very redeeming qualities to the X-Men, however. I'm not a total stickler about stuff like this. The X-Men have always been good at showing off just how characters should work as a team. Though there are moments of drama between characters, usually they always end up coming back out on top. Just like how the Fantastic Four demonstrates how a family dynamic should work between heroes. Not only that, but there are tons of good character moments even for characters I really care little or nothing about, like Beast and Colossus. Typically, the action in an X-Men comic is pretty top-notch and among the better comics to read if you want to see some epic battles. While the villains are repetitive, they are usually well written, though it does go without saying to someone more traditional like me that Magneto is still their greatest foe. The philosophical arguments and statements regarding prejudice are, for the most part, thought out pretty well, and stories that took the prejudice angle from a bit more grounded point of view and not some all humans are evil to mutants point of view were usually pretty cohesive, easy to follow, and didn't quite require a ton of backstory to jump into. Overall, there are things about the X-Men comics that I resent, things about the X-Men comics that I love, and things about the X-Men comics that just make me scratch my head. I'm pretty neutral on the subject overall, but if you really want me to review X-Men comics, then now you know my stance on them, and know what to expect when I actually do get around to reviewing X-Men comics in the distant future. But for now, this has been an Inked Editorial. I'm your host, the Ink Critic, providing tough love for creative minds. This has been a That Ruled production. You're awesome. The end.